All right, great. So now we're recording over. So same thing. I'll post this up, the lecture up on Blackboard, and I will also post this recording too. So we're going to be talking about listening skills, and then it's going to be an introduction. What I want to do is I want you to actually fill out the coaching survey during this class. It might take 10 minutes, but I want you to do it during this class just in case there's any hiccups in the process and I need to help you troubleshoot it. So we're basically going to be covering listening skills and going over an outline of conducting the coaching sessions. So you're going to be conducting more lengthy coaching sessions with your learning partners. So here's the resources that I pulled for this lecture. So we already had an introduction into motivational interviewing, and listening, specifically reflective listening, is going to be a big part of coaching. There's a motivational interviewing book too that's geared specifically for nutrition and fitness. And then the last one that I used was actually, it's a Harvard Business Review. It was on mindful listening. They actually put out a lot of really good series here. And a lot of coaching skills that I've picked up on have came from even just the business world. I'm not in business, but there's a lot of crossover in coaching. So another book that I didn't necessarily use for this lecture is called Crucial Conversations, and these guys, I think it's Carey Patterson, I believe is his first name. This group has a lot of great books out there, and Crucial Conversations is one of them. So if you're looking for reads, those four are good picks. Motivational interviewing, this one will take a while to read. This one's easier. This one the emotional intelligence one, you could probably read in 2 days. And Crucial Conversations, you could honestly probably get that done in a week. Okay, so here's the question. What do you think good listening is? You can raise your hand if you want to give me some insight as to what do you think good listening is. Go ahead, don't be shy. Jobin, what do you think? What do you think of when you think of good listening? Yeah, that's really good. So understanding. So it's not that you're just hearing what they're saying, it's that you're understanding what the words mean. Anyone else? Anyone else? What do you think good listening is? Yeah, Mike. And then we'll go Mike, then we'll go Matt, okay? Yeah, so I think you hit another aspect of it is setting up a safe environment for them, because there's the component where you're trying to understand what they're saying, but also you want them to feel safe that they can say whatever they want to say. Good. Matt? Yeah, yeah, I think you did another really great job there in adding another component to the environment, and that kind of goes along. So I think you three actually did a really great job nailing some good components of listening. So this is from the Motivational Interviewing and Nutrition book, and the authors say ultimately engaging the client is not following a certain script or asking the client questions, but listening, really listening with your eyes, your body, and your words, and giving the client your complete, undivided attention. So I'll give you guys a coaching checklist, but when you're coaching, there's no real script that you're going off of. It's really that combination of reflective listening to what the client is saying and asking some really good open-ended questions. And I think this definition also hits on another component of listening, and that's body language. And we'll talk about body language later, but what are some things that some people that you might do with your body language to show that you're listening? Can anyone give me some examples? Yeah, Mike, go ahead. Yeah, good. How about the opposite? Have you ever been speaking with somebody and you can tell by their body language that they're not listening? What does that look like? Yeah, Nickerson, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. So they're not. Yeah, they're even just they're not. So one thing that you can, if you are listening to someone, you might lean into the conversation versus if somebody's not listening, you might even see their feet are pointed in the opposite direction of you. Yeah, really good. Really good. Having your cell phone out, that's an easy one for body language. So here's what I want to cover today. One, benefits of being a good listener. We're going to talk more about reflective listening, which was a skill from motivational interviewing. And I want to cover mindful listening from that Harvard Business Review. And then I want to also make sure you have time to fill out that well-being assessment and ask me any questions if you need to. Okay, so what are the benefits of being a good listener? The first is that it engages the client and builds trust and commitment in the relationship. And I think Mike or Matt, you talked about trust, building trust. So you display empathy for the client's situation. When a client feels heard, they're likely to share more personal information. If you're not doing a good job of listening and it's obvious to the client, that's going to set up a roadblock, and they're not going to open up to you, and you're not really going to get to the core of why they want to make a change or why their goal is important to them. So clients often experience emotional healing or reduced anxiety about a behavior change just through talking about their concerns. And you've all probably experienced this before. Something that might feel so big to you in the moment starts to feel a little bit smaller if you can just talk to somebody about it and they're listening to you. So when people feel heard, they want to talk more. They feel understood, respected, and accepted. And you're also better able to assess the situation and provide better behavior change counseling. Next slide. When you're listening, I don't think I can really harp on this enough. A good listener also provides their clients with unconditional positive regard. That's Carl Rogers. So unconditional positive regard, I probably have said it before, but it's the belief that no matter what your client's outside behaviors are, that they're trying their best. It's about acceptance. You are not your acceptance of a client doesn't depend on what they do. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean you're condoning unhealthy behaviors, but no matter what the client does, you still accept them. And that can really be shown through good reflective listening, especially when clients don't feel judged. So I just want to go through this again. We've talked about listening, but then what are the benefits of more of reflective listening? So reflective listening, it makes the client feel validated and also understood. So again, we'll go into this a little bit later, but that reflective listening is where we make a best guess of what the client means and then verbalize it. It also helps to coax the client to elaborate on certain thoughts and feelings. And then also in hearing their own thoughts laid out in a direct and organized way, clients may experience aha moments. So a lot of times, and I actually just went through this in my coaching classes, I might go through just throwing out a bunch of different ideas and then hearing it back in a more concise and organized manner is actually pretty helpful. So you might have a lot of unorganized thoughts and a coach can help you organize those thoughts. So reflective listening. Reflective listening is going to be one of the most important and challenging skills required for a coach. Can anyone think of a difference between just regular listening and reflective listening? Yeah, Mike, go ahead. What do you think? Yes, you're asking good, insightful questions. So, an example would be maybe you were telling me a story, or just maybe something happened in your day, and you're telling me a story, and I'm just going, oh, mm-hmm. Maybe I am really listening to you, but the reflective listening would be involve asking good questions that help show that I understand. So how you respond to when somebody says something is going to be one of the most crucial aspects of whether or not you're listening, not listening, or actually practicing reflective listening. And this is a brief overview on something that we've talked about before. What's not listening? So giving advice, making suggestions, providing solutions. So if somebody says something and then we interject with, hey, have you thought about trying oatmeal milk? I don't know why, but something like that if we're offering suggestions. The next is cautioning. So an example of cautioning, if someone's not exercising and I said, hey, if you don't do this, it can increase your risk of heart attack. That's cautioning. Persuading with logic. So if somebody, again, knows they should be doing something, but they aren't doing it, and I tell them, hey, this is what you need to do to take care of your health, that would be persuading with logic. And all of these things are really roadblocks to a conversation. They're not going to move the conversation ahead. So I talked about, this is my beautiful diagram for reflective listening. So I talked about reflective listening before. So a speaker has some kind of meaning behind their words. So they think about what they want to express and then they say it. And remember, that's not always, our thoughts are not always encoded into words perfectly. So a speaker thinks something, they say something, maybe it's not perfect, and then the listener hears it, thinks about what that person actually means, and then says it back to that person. So again, you can see how there can be numerous different ways where the message can get mismatched. So it's one, what do we think? What do we say? What does the person think about what we say? And then what do they say about what they thought that you actually meant? So there's a lot that can go wrong. We might not get what that person is saying correctly. And this is where reflective listening is so important. So how do we, as a coach, we need to train ourselves to think more reflectively? And what that means is it's a continual awareness that what you believe or assume people mean is not necessarily what they really mean. Okay? Because, again, statements can have multiple meanings. So here's an example. Let's say somebody says, I wish I were more sociable. That can mean so many different things. It could mean, I feel lonely and I want to have more friends. It could mean, I get nervous when I have to talk to strangers. Or it means, I would like to be more popular. Or I can't think of anything to say when I'm with people. So what's reflective listening? Reflective listening is a way to check rather than assume that you already know what is meant. So imagine if somebody said something and you just assumed you knew what they meant, and then you continued on with that coaching conversation with a wrong assumption. So it's really just a way of clarifying that you understand, that the two of you understand each other. And good reflective listening continues the narrative of a coaching session. So skillful reflections move past what the person has already said without jumping too far. So how do reflections actually start? So this is from motivational interviewing, and they say statements that might begin with, it seems as though, so you feel, or you are. And I added too, it doesn't necessarily have to have some kind of opening like that. You might want to state what you just think that the client means. So one, reflective listening and change talk, but then also when do we provide reflective listening? So when do we reflect? One would be when you hear change talk. So remember, change talk can fall into any of those categories that we spoke about, which might be like disadvantages of the status quo, advantages of change, optimism towards change, intention to actually change. So in reflecting change talk, clients get to hear their own positive feelings about change, and then that ultimately continues to fuel that desire for change. You can also use change talk when you hear a client express ambivalence, and I'll give you an example of that later. So by hearing both sides of the argument restated, a client may start to understand why they haven't already made the behavior change on their own. And one of the more least used ones might be when you hear the client express what's called sustained talk. So sustained talk is the opposite of change talk. So in reflecting the client's hesitation, you can test the waters to assess motivation and increase the client's awareness of current concerns regarding behavior change. So I'll give you an example. So when you hear or see ambivalence, it's useful to reflect both sides. So when you reflect both sides, you're mentioning both change talk and sustain talk. So I'll give you an example. This isn't Scout. Scout's cuter than this dog, but I just wanted a sleeping example. I was having a coaching talk with one of my clients recently, and let me see if I can pull up the screen for her thing, because this actually is a good example for what you guys are going to do later. All right. Let's see. Share application screen. I might almost be there. Okay. So right here is actually what you're going to get out of the well-being assessment that you're going to be taking. So this was my client's well-being assessment. And what we did is we looked over different, so this assessment has 7 different areas of life. So it has life satisfaction, energy, mental and emotional fitness, exercise, nutrition, weight, and health. And so one thing that we looked at where she didn't necessarily feel that she was doing a great job was with her energy levels. So let me actually stop sharing this, go back to the lecture. So she didn't feel that good about her energy levels, and what we did was we dug into that. And why is this not sharing now? Okay. So we dug into energy levels, and so this person is a lawyer, and she tends to work really, really late. So one thing that she talked about doing was actually getting up earlier. But we kind of dug into that a little bit more, and she seemed to feel pretty ambivalent about that, because on the same side, she wanted to see what it was like if she just let herself sleep in. So we really dug into that, why she wanted to get up early versus why she also wanted to try to sleep in. So one of the reasons why she actually wanted to get up early was because she associated getting up late with being lazy. And so what I did is I kind of just let her talk about what was going on. And just mind you, this is a person who is working until 2 in the morning. And so one thing I could have said to her was, hey, there's no way that you're not lazy. You work until 2 in the morning. That would be one thing that I could have said to her. And I don't think that would have been the right approach, because she needs to be the one to think about it. So one thing that we actually talked about was, one, she identified that she associated waking up later with being lazy. And then the question that I asked her was, I said, so despite working from something like maybe 10 in the morning until 2 a.m., is that something that a person who might be lazy actually does? And she's like, no, I guess when you say that sounds kind of ridiculous. And so what we did is the double-sided reflection was, on one hand, you feel that getting up at past 7 in the morning makes you feel lazy, and on the other hand, you know that you're not lazy because you're working X amount of hours per day. So that would be an example of actually mentioning both sides of the reflection. And what happened basically was that she was able to identify that maybe her thought process that waking up at 7 was being associated with lazy might not actually be something that was true, especially because she's working quite late, and maybe she's more productive when she's working late, which is also something that she already identified. So what we talked about at the end of that session was actually trying out sleeping in if she's more productive working at night. So when do we want to actually reflect? That would be an example of reflecting on both sides of ambivalence. So what we want to really focus on is reflecting on when clients express change talk, because overall the purpose is for your client to voice the change side of the conflict and ultimately move in that direction. And we went through some different kinds of reflections maybe in some of the first few weeks of class. So some of this might be a refresher, but there's different kinds of reflections. There's simple reflections, complex reflections, and I'll go over simple versus complex reflections. There's metaphors, there's reframing, there's continuing the paragraph, there's double-sided reflections, there's undershooting, and then there's also amplified reflections. So we compare simple to complex reflections. Simple reflections repeat or slightly rephrase elements of the client's statements. So that might just mean somebody says, hey, I find it a really hard time to exercise, and you say, it's tough for you to schedule exercise. That's a really simple reflection. More complex reflections add further or alternative meaning beyond what the client has just said. And a complex reflection may emphasize feelings or the emotional dimension of what the client has also just said. So in this case, we're not just capturing what they said, we're capturing what they said and how it made them feel. The next one is a metaphor, and sometimes this can be useful for complex thought processes. So we use a metaphor, simile, or an analogy can bring a concept to life, and the practitioner or the coach paints a picture of how the client may actually feel. So let's just say you had somebody that is in a consistent habit of gaining weight, losing weight, or anything. They exercise consistently, then they fall off. I mean, just a metaphor for that would be, it feels like you're on a roller coaster. So there's ups and downs. The next is reframing, and the purpose of reframing is to actually de-emphasize sustained talk that the person might have. So this one might be good if somebody has made a statement that includes sustained talk. So it highlights a different perspective within the client's statement. So, for example, a client might say, I tried eating my dinner at the table without the TV, but I got more anxious and even lonely. And how you reframe that might be, so, well, it didn't turn out how you hoped. You were more mindful of your thoughts and feelings. So that would be a reflection that de-emphasizes sustained talk. Next is continuing the paragraph, and it takes a guess at what is unstated but implied in the conversation. So I'll give you another example. I was talking to a client, and one thing that she had mentioned was environmental supports. So actually social supports specifically. She was living with 2 other people, and one person generally wasn't healthy, had no interest in being healthy. The other person did have an interest in being healthy, and she was a person who was very interested in being healthy. And what she felt like is that as being human, there were days when she had lapses, and there were also days where her friends had her other friend who wanted to be healthy had a lapse, and she was there to help keep her friend on track. So she had expressed that, and my reflection was that it would be nice for you if, when you felt like you were falling off track, you had a friend to help keep you accountable, so that you are not always the one to be holding other people accountable. And she's like, yeah, that's exactly correct. She felt like she was always the one who was forcing, or basically the example would be if she had a craving to eat something like a pizza and she actually had somebody else that was like, no, we don't need to do this, versus where she felt like she was always the one who was doing that. And that continued the paragraph going on. So double-sided reflection, it's used when a client is expressing ambivalence. And it might look like this. So you say on one hand, blank, and on the other hand. So we're connecting our ands with but, are connecting those two sentences with ands instead of buts. So what you might say is you're struggling to fit exercise into your schedule, and on the other hand, you want to exercise more. And what you want to do is you want to end with the change talk portion. Can anyone guess what would happen if I flipped that script around where I said, let's say, okay, so you want to do more exercise, and on the other end, you're struggling to fit exercise into your schedule. Which way would that person start talking about? Would they start talking about the struggle part or what they want part? Actually, let's just do this. If I flip the script and I said this statement, I said, you want to exercise more and you're struggling to fit it into your schedule. Would they raise your hand if you think that they would talk about the struggles that they're having? All right, raise your hand if you think that they would talk about wanting to put more exercise into their schedule. Raise your hand if you stop paying attention because Scout ran away. Buddy, they need you. Thanks, Ricardo. So if you end with that change talk portion, they're going to be much more likely to want to talk about that change portion. So the next is undershooting, and it depreciates the intensity of an emotion that's expressed. And doing so may clarify what was meant, which can deepen the client's understanding of her feelings. And it can bring out the client's true emotions. So someone might say, my roommates can eat whatever she wants and not gain any weight, and she's always cooking unhealthy food. And your reflection might be something like, you're not crazy about your roommate's eating habits. And then that can really help them to elaborate more on how they really feel. Next is amplified. So it's reflecting back what the person has said in an exaggerated form, and it might help them consider the other side of ambivalence. So let's just say someone's like, oh, I just can't fit there's no way that I can exercise. I have no time to do it. And your reflection might be, there's no way you can fit exercise into your routine right now. And that's definitely an amplification because they probably could. But what you want to do when you say that is to make sure it doesn't come across as sarcastic. So if I went into it and I said, there's no way you could fit exercise into your routine right now, I don't want it. It's all about the tone of your voice. So when you're using amplified reflections, be sure to make sure you're not coming across as sarcastic. So let's do a practice. All right. So you're going to tell me what you think, what reflection you think this is. So if I was talking to somebody and I said, you hate exercise, what reflection do you think that might be? Yeah, Nickerson, what do you think it might be? Yeah, I thought it would be amplified too. What do you think? Let's just say for argument's sake that someone's like, yeah, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like exercise. And then you said you hate exercise, and that's a big amplification of how they actually feel. Do you think that they're gonna be like, yeah, I hate exercise, or do you think that they're gonna say, well, I don't hate all exercise? Which one do you think, Nickerson? Yeah, I would agree. I think it's gonna be the second one. Okay, so how about this next reflection? On the one hand, you don't like going to the gym, and on the other hand, you're feeling motivated to be more active after your doctor's appointment. What do we think that one is? Matt, go ahead. I think it's double-sided too. Good job. All right, how about this one? You feel like you fell off the wagon. What do we think that one is? Yeah, Nickerson, go ahead. Yeah, good job. So when you're actually doing your coaching sessions, don't worry about looking through this list and be like, oh, I really want to give a double-sided reflection, or I really want to give a reframing or metaphor one. It's really just about what works in that time. Don't worry about the name or the label that's actually on it, but those are all examples. And I want to add in some extra things to these coaching sessions, and one is the value of extended silence. Have any of you ever maybe been talking to somebody? You can just raise your hand if this is true. You don't need to share an exact example, but you've been talking to somebody and there's more that you want to say, and you could just use a little bit of silence, but that person, as soon as you say something, that person just jumps right back in before you can really think your thoughts and say them out loud. Has that ever happened to anybody? Raise your hand if that's happened to you, where you could have benefited from some extra silence. Yeah, so there's a lot of value in having extra silence in a coaching session. So that might mean being okay with being silent for an extended period of time. I mean, you're not going to be silent for an entire minute, but read that client's body language. You'll know if they're thinking about more things. They might put their head down and they might look like they're thinking. So a lot of that is just using common sense and how long you should be waiting. And then we actually talked about that as body language. So making sure that you have the right body language when you are when you're listening. And it also means being aware of your client's body language. There might be some topics that they just don't want to dive into, and maybe they're not saying it out loud, but their body language is cueing that. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to talk about mindful listening from that Harvard Business Review. So they add in active listening, which I think has some nice additions to that reflective listening that wasn't necessarily stated. And one is having an attitude of genuine interest in seeking a client's perspective and getting to know him or her. So I really think that you need to approach a coaching session with an attitude of genuine interest in what that client is speaking about. So active listening requires an individual to pay attention, avoid distractions, look the speaker in the eye, and provide feedback at appropriate times. So contrary to popular opinion, good listening does not mean just sitting in silence. Interrupting a client is going to be a bad idea. However, good listeners ask questions that may promote insight at appropriate times. So I'm actually what I'll do is I will post this short section from this book because I think it's really good. So what they did is they had four, in chapter 1 of this book, there are 4 main findings. I believe they asked over 3,000 people what are qualities of the best listeners they know. And they came up with 4 main findings, and it was good listening is much more than being silent while the other person talks. And I think that kind of hits reflective listening on the head. So good listening isn't just about being quiet. It's about asking good statements that continue making good reflections, or asking good open-ended questions that continue the dialogue. Good listening, and this is actually something that we didn't talk about yet, but good listening includes interactions that build a person's self-esteem. We've talked a little bit about this actually. It's what strengths do you have that can help you reach that goal? That would be a good open-ended question to include in your reflective listening, or to build on your reflective listening. Good listening is seen as a conversation, which kind of piggybacks off of point 1. And then this was one that they actually said they weren't expecting to find, and that's good listeners tend to make suggestions. And I think that some of what we've talked about might make you think that a good coach isn't telling a person what to do. But I do think that there's a time and a place to make good suggestions to clients based on what they've said, especially once you've built up trust and rapport with that person. And the way that you approach that is important. And you might even ask for permission. So asking for permission might be, are you okay with me sharing an idea that I think might work for you? instead of kind of forcing an idea on somebody. So I think that there's a good way to actually do this. I'll post this too so you can read it because I think it's great. Different levels of listening. Okay, and now I believe they had 6 different levels of listening. And so what I think that you can do with this is think about what level you might be currently on, and then think about how you can move up a level as a listener. And so not every conversation requires the highest levels of listening, but many conversations would benefit from greater focus on listening skills. So here's the first 4 levels. So level 1 is the listener creates a safe environment in which difficult, complex, or emotional issues can be discussed. The next level is I believe we said this right in the beginning of class, is that the listener clears away distractions like phones and laptops. They're focusing attention on the other person and making appropriate eye contact, so that's body language. And the next one is the listener seeks to understand the substance of what the other person is saying. They capture ideas, ask questions, and restate issues to confirm that their understanding is correct. This is good reflective listening. The next is that the listener observes nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, gestures, postures, and numerous other body language signals. Okay. And then level 5, the listener increasingly understands the other person's emotions and feelings about the topic at hand and identifies and acknowledges them. The listener empathizes with and validates those feelings in a supportive, non-judgmental way. So we're finding what's the feel. It's not just what they're saying and what they mean to say, it's what's the feeling behind those words. The listener asks questions that clarify assumptions that the other person holds and helps other person see issues in a new light. The other thing is good listeners never hijack the conversation so that they or their issues become the subject of discussion. This is one of my biggest pet peeves of listening. Raise your hand if this has ever happened to you. You are talking to somebody, maybe a friend, about a problem that you have and you really just want them to listen to you, but then they make it about themselves. Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Yeah. I had a bad day at work, and then, I had such a bad day at work too. Let me tell you about my bad day at work. That's one of the biggest pet peeves that I have for listening. So especially when you're coaching, if somebody's coming to you, especially if they're paying you, and they're talking about things that they want to resolve, you cannot make it about you. It's okay to interject some experiences as long as it is going to help them. And you might always ask for permission when you're going to be doing this. And it might be like, hey, this sounds very similar to something that happened to me once. Is it okay if I share it with you? And then how I actually resolve that. That might be useful, but just be really careful about that. I would be interested in knowing where you all think that you might be on here. And I won't ask you to say it out loud, but if you can look over this list, actually let's say this. If you can look over this list and then type in what's the level that you want to attain. So if you identify yourself as being a level 1 listener, don't say I want to move to be a level 6 listener. Just say I would like to become a better level 3 listener, or I would like to work on becoming a better level 2 listener. So why don't I give you a minute to think about that, and then if you can type that in the text box, you can do that. If you would like me to move over to the next slide, I can do that quickly, but essentially what the level 5 is really understanding the emotions behind the words, and then also taking that and helping somebody clarify all their assumptions. So where do we want to be? Do we want to move to be a level 3 listener, level 4 listener? Maybe you're always on your phone when somebody's talking to you. Maybe you want to be a level 1 listener. Great. And I think that those are all really good answers. Level 3 or level 4. I think level 1 and level 2 are the absolute bare minimums. As I say, clear away distractions, and I have a dog sitting on my lap. So yeah, you know, I wouldn't be coaching with you sitting on my lap, man. So we really want to make sure we clear away all distractions, make sure the environment's safe. And it sounds like a lot of you really want to do one of two things. You want to become better reflective listeners, or you want to become better reflective listeners and then also be able to observe body language even better. It's great. And then just the listening environment. We want to create a safe environment where challenging and emotional issues can be discussed. Again, we want to clear away all distractions, cell phones, and focus on the client. And the listener is seeking to understand the meaning of what the person is saying by asking good questions. We're observing nonverbal cues, and we're also providing empathy and validation. Okay, I'm gonna pause no, actually, I won't pause the recording yet. So what I want to do is I'm gonna tell you where to get all this information. We're gonna do it before you leave class. So I want to note that this initial session that you do with your learning partner might last the entirety of the class. And I mean that as you are the coach for 90 minutes, and then next class you might be the client for 90 minutes. So what you need to do is you need to fill out the well-being assessment, and let me share my screen with you so you can see where to get that. One sec. Okay. That's not it. So if you go to your weekly sessions, and then if you go, I don't know why this is actually acting like this, but if you go to it's on the week 11 folder. Actually, it's not. Okay. So you are going to go to this website right here. And you're just going to have to hit I accept the agreement. And now when you type in all of this information, what you're going to do is you are going to use my email, which I put right here. So you're going to use my email for your coach's email, okay? So you're going to fill all this out. It might take 15 minutes for you to actually do, so we'll make sure that we get this done just in case you have any issues with it. So I want you to fill that out. And I also want you to redo this. It's that positivity assessment ratio, okay? Now, once you have filled out this survey, the survey that's right here, it's going to generate results. It's going to look exactly the same as what I showed you for that client. And then I want you to download this importance of 7 areas of well-being document. So you're going to download that. And then after you do that, you're going to transcribe your results from the survey that you just did into that Word document that I just downloaded. So first things first, let's all go onto Blackboard and start with this link right here. Okay. One sec, I'm going to come back to classroom. So once you fill that out, you're going to get something that looks like this. And that's what you're going to transcribe into that Word document. So now I'm going to pause the recording.